Hello everyone, I'm Forrest McFreelove, and this is Speedplay France and Hearts of Iron 4, number 12. We left off invading the Soviet Union, with most of our forces, well, not really doing very much. So we're going to go ahead and set a new offensive line, pressing back behind all of the three major cities of the Soviet Union, being Leningrad, Stalingrad, and Moscow in the middle. We're also gathering our something like 47 armored and mechanized units and just thrusting them forward into two directions generally. The main thrust is going to be going north, with the idea being we're just going to drive all the way up to Leningrad, cutting off all of the Soviet forces in the Baltic states, or I guess Baltic provinces at this point, and yeah, just generally cut off that entire section of the northern Soviet military. The other force is going to go and support them, but also make a thrust vaguely towards Moscow. In the ideal world, both thrusts will be fully successful, and we will not only destroy the Baltic state Soviet armies, but also seize their capital. From there, we'll probably try to shift all of our forces. However, that really remains to be seen based on how well everything does on the ground, although we are making tremendous gains up near even Novgorod, however, just generally up in the north. Fighting towards Moscow is going a little bit slower, in part because I'm not focusing on it nearly so much as this great northern thrust. However, we are just thrusting as far as we can up into the north. We do still have a lot of armored and mechanized units on their way to the front line. Some of them are getting caught behind enemy lines, but it looks as though we're going to achieve most of our primary objectives. Secondary objectives probably not so much. However, we are doing very well very quickly. We did even take Leningrad, so all of these Soviet forces are now cut off except for by sea, where admittedly they can probably still get a decent amount of resources. You'll notice the war is not really decided in the sense that they did manage to just go and retake part of this territory. However, we have enough forces we can hopefully take that causeway back. And other than that, we're just generally going to be advancing wherever, whenever, and hopefully doing a decent job of it. Our thrust towards Moscow is also starting to turn more favorably, which is pretty good news. And we are just sending forces vaguely into these Baltic state territories, not really fighting very much Soviet resistance, which is both good and bad. Good in the sense that we're going to take the territory, bad in the sense that we won't really destroy very many Soviet military forces. So it's a give and a take, a good and a bad, but ultimately now it is time for the thrust east, which is facing some pretty large resistance compared to this force going up into the Baltic provinces. However, not really having that hard of a time of it. They are advancing pretty well. We did get a couple units encircled, however, we're a bunch of mechanized and armored units, so we can probably just go around them. These Soviet forces are all going to be attacked and hopefully destroyed. They're all out of supply, so it shouldn't be too hard. And it looks as though we might be able to get these units back into supply chains, which is pretty great. And overall, we're just pressing forward to the best of our ability, trying to take over the ports now in the Baltic provinces. We did inadvertently encircle some Soviet units over on the east, and we're just generally pushing their front line back, really all across the area. This isn't exactly ideal. It'd probably be better to encircle them, and it looks like we even lost control over territory up near Leningrad, which is less than great. Overall, though, our forces are, even where they're not just winning, in other areas they are, so they can just circle around the Soviets. The Baltic provinces are almost entirely under our control, and there are a few Soviet forces just held up where there's no one even nearby. So it looks like we can even press forward here, maybe take Moscow, circle around from the north. It's really lucky for us that it is summer now and that this whole thing just kind of worked out like that. If we're lucky, we'll be able to just roll over through the north of Moscow, where we really wouldn't be able to get anywhere close to in the winter. We're also finishing off resistance over in the Baltic provinces, which should be a pretty nice shift. Over here in the north, there's just a lot of action in the forests, where we're not really likely to make very many gains. We are also cutting towards Moscow still. Looks like we might be able to drive straight into the city. Unfortunately, their forces do get there in time to prevent us from just seizing the city without a fight, as we did in Leningrad. However, we are also just gunning forces around the city center, so hopefully when we attack them from multiple directions, we'll fare better. And it looks as though the battle is going 65% good It's still red, though. Everywhere else, though, we are just moving our forces to get rid of all these little pockets so the AI doesn't put units on them for really no reason whatsoever. The battle is finally being won in Moscow, which is great. And yeah, it looks like that unit is trying to break out, which is not ideal whatsoever. And generally, we are making gains. Pretty rapid gains, doing fairly well. Maybe not the total domination of the Soviet Union we'd faced previously, although that's in part because we're attacking on a wider line than we were previously. We're also going to go ahead and start producing aircraft, fighters, close air supports, things like that. There we go, the fall of Moscow. Upsettingly, it says Allied forces. Now, while I can't actually deny that the majority of the front line is made up of Allied forces, I mean, come on, we're Vichy France, we're fascist, we're not part of the Allies. Why paradox? At any rate, though, it did just happen. We took Moscow. I guess the Allies took Moscow, which is a little insulting to the glory of the French, we'll just say Republic anyway. And yeah, there we go. An issue that we're now facing is that we don't really have a great strategic objective with our forces, since the main thrusts were directed at Leningrad and Stalingrad, and now both of those territories belong to us. We could probably just drive deeper into the northern wastelands of the Soviet Union to capture what small number of victory points they still have. We are also thrusting over down towards the south a bit at this point, with the idea basically being we do have to go take Stalingrad and the Caucasus if we're going to actually win this war, as has been evidenced by the last time we invaded the Soviets as Germany. And honestly, at this point, I think we really do have it in the bag. The question is really just how long is it going to take, and when it's done, what all are we going to get? Now, the more that we do, the more we'll get in the peace deal. Obviously, though, at the same time, we are going to end up fighting the Allies anyway, so it doesn't really matter if they get all that much of the Soviet Union. And something that's becoming ever more concerning is the inevitable logistical and just micromanagement nightmare that is going to be fighting a war against the Allies and also Japan, which is still fighting us off in the Pacific, technically against us somewhere. So the moment we actually do declare war on the Allies is going to be just a chaotic mess, and afterwards we're probably going to let the AI control most of the theaters far away. I don't actually know. It'll be interesting. It'll be a mess, though. That is the best word for it. Until then, though, we have the relatively, thankfully, straightforward, massive single front against the Soviet Union, where we're able to turn the collective weight of the French military machine against a foe who is thankfully standing in one big line that we can just kind of draw circles around. And, you know, that is a pretty nice place to be, so we can really just enjoy it while it lasts. We also managed to encircle some extra Soviet forces. Someone mentioned in the comments on the last video that I really should make level 10 Air Force bases and also get some radar up on the channel. We already have radar up on the channel, so we do have intel on that. We did that as we were preparing for the Soviet War. I did not, however, upgrade our Air Force bases yet, although that is a very good idea, and we will definitely get to work on that in the next episode, as well as just finishing up everything that we need to finish up. I'm not entirely sure how far we're going to get with that one yet, as I haven't recorded it yet. At any rate, though, up in the north, the line's kind of stagnating. Most of our forces are thrusting down into the southern Soviet Union, with the general idea being that we're just going to smash into all the Soviet forces. We're also getting the last landing tech, although we are several months ahead of when it actually becomes available, just because it's really the most important thing. We're going to have to invade Britain when we declare war on the Allies, hopefully knock them out of the war just right quick, and deal with them, deal with all of the Allied states in continental Europe, which also includes Greece now, which is a little problematic. I'm talking so much about the future when we're still deep into the Soviet Union. We haven't even gotten to Stalingrad yet. I need to stop with all that. Basically, even when we win this war, there's a lot of war ahead of us in our future that we're going to have to deal with before things are over. Right now, though, we're doing well. Our armies aren't really facing very much resistance from the Soviets, which is pretty great news for us. We are charging towards Stalingrad now, definitely moving our forces over as much as we can, hopefully cutting off those Soviet forces near Crimea. Admittedly, they can just walk down through the south and cross over into Russia through the more Caucasus-like bit of the Black Sea. However, our forces are still just thrusting through. Soviet resistance is not in every province, since they had a very large number of their forces just on the front line, and we kind of encircled and destroyed a whole lot of those, including a lot of these right here that we're about to do that same thing to. And really just because our units move faster than their infantry, and where they do have armored or mechanized units, we fight them and in the process allow other forces to go behind them and surround them. Most of the Soviet forces that were fighting us just inadvertently end up encircled even with these general front-wide offensives. Even right here, we're probably going to encircle these Soviet troops if we're lucky. In other areas, it's the same story over and over again. They're either too weak to fight us and then we just overrun them, or they're strong enough to fight us, so we just encircle them and destroy them like that. It's a pretty straightforward war that is just going very well for us, especially because it's summer, although it is now middle of August, so summer is going to end fairly soon, and we'll have to deal, I believe, with the rainy season, and then with the winter. Hopefully by the time the rainy season comes, we'll be fighting in the less awful parts of the Soviet Union, and we'll be able to keep up the momentum throughout the winter. Going into the Caucasus Mountains in the winter is probably not going to be the most ideal thing, so hopefully we can get all that resolved fairly soon. We even managed to just seize Stalingrad with a single unit of, I believe, mechanized, and that seems like a good enough place to stop right there, so we're going to take a look. Soviet casualties have increased by almost 1 million, ours by a bit of around 100,000. So yeah, we're doing very well. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Hopefully we will conclude this war tomorrow.